To believe means to adhere to connect with, to hold on to. I have a child image in my mind with regards to believing. It's like being held and holding on to one's mother, as it were, or being accompanied by one's father, being taken by the hand. And not only being pulled, but allowing oneself to be pulled, to be taken, to be held. And so therefore to believe is also to allow oneself to be loved and to learn how to love. Believing is not only an emotional experience, but it's also an intellectual experience. And in the end, it's a total experience. One's whole mind, heart, body, and soul is involved in this relationship, this, as it were, communion, this coming together.
It is important for us to realize that there are different fields of knowledge with different methodologies. The word science, as we use it today, can only be applied to study which gives rise to data proven through experimentation. Science, therefore, can only speak about the material world, and we must always look for scientific certainty. If proof cannot be attained through an experiment, we are presented with what may be an attractive theory, but is not yet considered scientifically valid. And those theories can never be proven by experiments, remain as what we would call science fiction. Naturally, this is a field of knowledge that is very limited, because everything that is important in our lives, such as personal relationships, our families, society, our desires to find truth, beauty, and goodness, which is, in reality, what defines human rationality, cannot be submitted to experimentation. We need to realize, therefore, that science only deals with material phenomena, and it excludes almost everything that is most important in human life.
Descartes held that the object of thought is thought itself. He therefore believed that, to some degree, reason could be activated in and of itself, without any communication with reality. Aristotle said that man's intelligence is like a blank slate. Without the sensations received from the exterior world, from reality, man's intellect cannot be activated. It cannot stimulate itself. And actually, even the first Western metaphysicist, Parmenides, said that to think and to think of being are synonymous. That is, it is impossible to think of something if there is no existing reality behind that thought. Now this helps us to understand that philosophy is essentially the philosophy of being. Heidegger, a modern philosopher, although much of his philosophy is debatable, recognized that the true philosophical question, the foundational question, has to do with being. And this is an aspect that helps us to understand how important it is to free philosophy from the lie that holds that reason can be founded upon reason alone without ever looking at reality.
I received my doctorate in physics in the United States, and I know that when we began to study modern physics, quantum mechanics, We learned that all scientists agree that no one understands it. We know that it is correct because the experiments confirm the predictions made by quantum mechanics. One of the scientists who contributed most significantly to quantum mechanics, Richard Feynman, explicitly stated, "I can affirm without the least fear of being contradicted that there is no one who understands quantum mechanics, but we accept it because it correctly predicts what we later observed in experiments. Even in the field of science, it is not always possible to fully understand things. How poor God would be if he were nothing more than what I understood him to be. I don't understand myself. I don't understand the material world. So naturally, God must be much more than that."
What comes to mind right now is a definition of philosophy given by a German moral philosopher named Robert Spemann, who is actually still alive, and says that philosophy is, in essence, a field that constantly interrogates itself about the existential questions. In that sense, philosophy is always asking itself the same questions, and that means there is no philosopher who can give an exhaustive and definitive response to those questions. In a certain sense, the inability of any philosophical theory to draw a definitive conclusion concerning existential questions makes it possible to have several points of view that are, at the same time, compatible. But it also makes it possible, if a God does exist, that he could reveal something that exceeds our own capacity to reason about these perennial questions. John Paul II reminded us that often the only way that we can enter into dialogue with non-believers is through the use of reason. Through using reasonable arguments, therefore, we can help others understand that, for example, when faced with the multitude of concepts concerning man and the ultimate meaning of all things, etc., perhaps the Christian way of understanding them is more reasonable than the other alternatives. But this is simply a persuasive way of trying to at least create a favorable atmosphere so that the other can draw closer, if he or she desires to make an act of faith. In this sense, I would also say that not only is faith not an obstacle to reason, but for the one who uses faith correctly, that is, without using premises of faith in a rational discussion with someone who does not have faith, faith actually guides reason, because in those ultimate fundamental questions to which reason can never fully respond, faith sheds a hidden light. Faith has as its object imperceptible truths, that is, truths that cannot be proven by evidence because they imply a mystery and cannot be demonstrated by reason.
Perché non sono dimostrabili con la ragione.
The Creator is not going to mislead his creature. As an engineer who then became a philosopher and a theologian and now a bioethicist, I really try and show people how there is no contradiction between faith or reason or the sciences or philosophy or theology or metaphysics, and how when you have the basic foundations, everything comes together.
They're not mutually exclusive. Take, for example, Freud, who was actually Hebrew, but an atheist. Freud said that the most beautiful book that had ever been written about psychology was St. Augustine's Confessions. And I think that anyone who has read the Confessions perceives that it's more than just a book about spirituality and faith. It is also an extraordinary work on psychology, where St. Augustine doesn't spare any detail about his person, his mind, or his story. He delves deep into a search for God. He says that he sought God outside of himself, far away from himself, in creatures. But he found God within himself. In the process of going deeper, digging down, searching, St. Augustine finds God inside of himself. I love St. Augustine. Perhaps it's because of my profession, but reading St. Augustine's works helps me to understand precisely how faith and psychology, religion and psychology, can walk hand in hand, and how the two can even be integrated together in such a manner that they mutually enrich each other in a very profound way.
Assolutamente a braccetto, anzi si integrano e si arricchiscono profondamente l'uno con l'altra.
Pensando a quel libro che
This reminds me of a book that Ratzinger wrote, Introduction to Christianity, in which he states that in the end there isn't a big difference between the atheist and the believer, at least from an existential point of view, because neither has reached absolute certainty concerning how he should live his life. The atheist often reasons thinking that there is nothing beyond this world, that everything ends with the physical universe, but he can't be absolutely certain of this. Once in a while he is confronted by a doubt that torments him a little, that there could perhaps be an afterlife. On the other hand, the believer, who undoubtedly enjoys a strong degree of certainty, also experiences that there are some dark moments in life. Not everyone is always entirely sure about what he should do. Sometimes the believer feels like he's in a boat, the boat of faith that navigates in an enormous sea. Today, the sea of nihilistic relativism, in which, at times, he experiences the fear of sinking. So from this point of view, both possess strong convictions, but not absolute certainty.
ma non una certezza assoluta.
All of us throughout our lives at some point have had a doubt about our faith, about God, about existence, about what it's all about. But I would tend to guess that those who don't know Christ or those who are atheists have too had doubts about whether or not God really does exist.
Il problema lo risolve Pascal.
Pascal resolves this problem with the wager theory, in which he explains that faced with the choice between nothingness and the existence of God, it is better to wager that God exists, and this can be confirmed through a valid argument. His theory can be sustained through the following hypothetical situations. Suppose that both the believer and the atheist fail in their beliefs. That is, the atheist discovers that in reality, in the end, he doesn't face nothingness but something else. And the Christian discovers that in reality, in the end, there is nothing else. Now, why is one position preferable rather than the other? Well, if the Christian, after having behaved well, according to the commandments, after having made the effort to live a good life within his own limitations, seeking always the mercy of God, dies, and then there's nothing, he's not going to pull out his hair and cry because there's not another life, because if there is nothing, it would be impossible to lament the fact that there is nothing. However, if on the contrary, the non-believer, after having wagered on a world in which God did not exist, as if the only thing that exists was his own world or his own desires to be happy, after having fled from pain, trying to succeed in life at all costs, without any particular standards or basic principles, finds himself in a situation in which afterwards God exists, that would mean that he could be excluded eternally from his love. Between the two options, it is absolutely clear that the latter is the worst. Therefore, it is better to behave as if God existed, and it is more reasonable.
Comportarsi come se Dio esistesse perché è più ragionevole.
I don't see the contradiction between science and religion, science and faith. I just don't see it. I don't think anyone in the church is against science, at least if we're talking about the Catholic Church. Of course, there are sectors of Protestant churches that have a much more critical attitude towards science, towards scientific discoveries. But if we're talking about the Catholic Church, I think that this attitude of rejection of scientific discoveries is basically non-existent.
Reale.
Faith is, before anything else, a personal act, but at the same time it's an act realized in community.
Faith is never isolated. Faith is always connected with, to the source, which is God. Faith can happen in various moments of one's life through various instruments of faith. One can discover God through nature, but one only discovers a personal God through Jesus Christ. So therefore you see there is a development, there's a gradual development in this discourse about faith. You know, you pass from an impersonal experience to very profound experience of communion, a very personal, a personalissima experience of communion. And all of this happens within the church,
I just came into the church and my life has changed so much. You know, I prayed about it. I was like, Lord, if this is if this is real, like, show me that this is a real faith. Especially going to Mass before I had entered and watching everybody walk up to receive communion. It was really beautiful. I just thought they were so lucky to be able to do that. I couldn't wait till, I knew one day, I didn't know when, but I knew one day I would enter and I would be able to have that same feeling and that same communion with God.
The heart can mistake itself. Even when our intentions are good, we can be wrong. How many times have we made a mistake in our judgment? A little example. Say I'm at the university and I lose my cell phone. I look for it. I can't find it. And then the first thing that comes into my mind is, well, I know someone who needs a cell phone. Could it have been him? Did he steal it from me? Was it him? And while I'm thinking about this, a colleague approaches me and says, "Do you know that we found your cell phone?" So I start to ask myself, why did I doubt that person? If we take a look at what we say in our hearts, we will see that we often judge wrongly. It's important to always be aware and to follow what the Church teaches us so that we don't fall. That way our hearts can judge and act in the light of these teachings. We put our faith into practice and act in coherence with our faith, with what we believe.
My faith is a very important part of who I am. In fact, it's what I make all of my decisions based on. I always want to make moral decisions, but then again, there's so much gray out there. How do you know where to begin? How do you know where to base it on? I'm so blessed to have the Church to look to as my guide and my compass there. You know, she has thought of all of these questions. She's come up with answers to help guide me so that I can continue to live my life on a track that is honest and good. It's full of integrity and is always respecting the dignity of other people. And I'm so grateful for my faith, for this gift.
The Church makes or renders faith contemporary. Therefore, there's this organic development through dogma, through teaching, through magisterium.
The Church's message is valid today, tomorrow, and yesterday. It's a living message and it's useful in any moment. So to follow the message is to follow the gospel. To follow the words of the living Christ, and to follow the living words of Christ is to follow the gospel. He didn't tell us to do weird things. So can you be faithful to the gospel in the 21st century? Does being faithful to the gospel mean that you have to wear a tunic and sandals and go to the desert like a grasshopper? That's not what it means. It means that you have to surrender yourself, and God has to be your top priority, along with those around you. So I think it's very possible to be faithful to the gospel in the 21st century.
The Church really reaches out to people of all ages with this incredible message of hope, and I see that people are longing for that in the world today. They're looking for a recipe for happiness and just don't know where to go. And a lot of times people look to people of faith and try to understand what is it that gives you the joy that you're living with. It's so true that it comes from a deep love of Christ. It comes, with that love comes a peace, an understanding of self, an understanding of from where we came and where we're going. Then it naturally leads to that happiness that we hope to share with other people. The Church's message, especially that of John Paul II, which he repeated again and again and again, be not afraid, means so much, especially to people our age. That idea of just going out into the deep, not being afraid to cast our nets.
If we want to help people to find Christ in the Church today, we have to try to be witnesses. That is, we have to be other Christs. Each of us can be a Christ, so that other people, non-believers, can find Christ in us.
Christ has saved me, Beatriz, from the 21st century. He has saved me from my mediocrity, from my fears, my complexes. On a psychological level, I can get over them or not, okay, but they've been conquered. Because he gave himself up for me, Beatriz Lopez Roberts Luzon. But he thought of me, and that's true today, and it will be true for people 100 years from now.
It's very important to consider the faith of the other. But at the same time, that obviously doesn't mean we should compromise our own faith. When others ask us questions, we should respond. It is very important to live simply, because the transmission of the faith depends on the way we explain it and on the way we apply it. The faith is a grace that is transmitted. We receive the faith through people, through our parents or a parish, but we also transmit it to others.
For some, it begins as a theory. It then becomes a personal experience. And so therefore I never want to be, black and white in this, because I realize that one grows in one's faith. And especially today, there are many men and women, there are many young people today who have an idea. They have an idea of the absolute. They have an idea of a deus ex machina. They have an idea of something. But I think that's where our love comes in. That's where the beauty of the church needs to be made manifest through our life and our ability to become a living icon of God's love. That's where we bring theory down to the heart so that it can become a personal experience for them.
How can you talk to someone about love if that person hasn't experienced love? I believe in the apostolate of friendship, and I really believe that if someone doesn't know the love of God and doesn't know the church, that person can fall in love with this big family and this great gift, which is the church, through another person.
On a practical level, I think what is most helpful to a number of those who were not believers in any religion, and seems to be the most common to them coming around, was to see something in those who believed in God, apart from which religion that person believed in, and saw something that made them have this sense of peace and joy and contentment. And they wanted to have that. We all desire things that we perceive to be good. And I think if people see that we have something that they want but they don't know how to get it, then as a scientist who's gotten through the point where they have to ask themselves, well, what is the data? The data is that they have something, I want that. How do I get it? Well, science is not going to help me. And if I have that iota of a doubt, I have to be open to the fact that, well, maybe there is something out there and it's beyond the science, it's beyond anything empirical.
I found that in the corporate world there were many ways that I was able to share my faith. A lot of that was just by living it, by being a living example.
It's just that people are great. I love being with people, and they transmit, they help you to see what they have, and you can show them what you have. With scripture, with the saints, with specific things like, let's go do this, or let's go see that. I mean, I share my faith all the time.
In the past, it used to be just the priests, the clergy, and the religious who were primarily responsible for taking the faith to different corners of the world, or even locally preaching and proclaiming the faith. But nowadays we understand that when in the Gospel of Matthew 28:19, Jesus told the disciples to proclaim the gospel to the corners of the earth, he didn't just give it to them. That was the Great Commission given to each and every one of us. And it doesn't just have to be through our studies and experience in theology or philosophy, but through our daily lives, through everything we do. And it's the idea of just knowing that we have received so much. And if we have to share this, we cannot just assume that, oh, I can just sit back and relax and someone else has the job of doing that. No, we have to all do the little that we can.
So many people at my school, my friends and teachers have helped me because they've taught me so much. And they've answered so many questions, especially my best friend and roommate. I would ask her questions all the time about the faith, and she would always answer them. And that actually helped me a lot, that there are answers.
If there are people who don't ask questions, I'd say they should start. And if they do, I'd tell them they should look for answers. And they should look for them where they can find them. That is, in the church. Where are you going to ask about love? In a club at night if you can find some girls? Well, no. Ask he who is love itself, the one who died for you and for me.
I'm sure you have heard of Bernadette Subiru, the famous Bernadette from Lourdes. After one of the times that Mary appeared to her, she went running to see the parish priest and said, "Father, Our Lady asked me to build a church so people can come in pilgrimage." So she transmits the message of Our Lady to the parish priest. The priest said, "But how am I supposed to believe those words?" And she answered simply, innocently, but it was a very profound answer. "I wasn't asked to make you believe it, but to tell you. That's it."
We have this obligation, to listen very carefully to the needs of this moment in history, reading the signs of the times, This is an obligation. We receive this as an obligation. Heed the signs of the times. Allow for the signs of the times to interrogate you so that you give life to faith. You make faith available.
When I was ordained a priest in 2001, I felt that the need to teach the faith was so great. But there is so much ignorance about the teachings of the Church. And unfortunately, people still don't know the teachings of Vatican II. But that's not just their own fault. It's our fault too.
And I think that we all need to open up our catechism of the Catholic Church. This is the Church. This is the Church that's gifting to us a means through which we can grow in our faith. And this is a gift to the heart also.
For me, it's not that what I believe is just important, it's fundamental. I can't imagine my life without my faith. It is the foundation of my life. It is what sustains everything else. It doesn't matter if I say, no, it doesn't really matter. But I know that if I didn't have faith, God, and the joy I have through Jesus Christ, I wouldn't be able to fully live. And joyfully, I wouldn't live, I would just drag myself along. So my faith is essential.
Jesus has touched me. The Lord is always there so that you can support yourself in Him, rest in Him, and so that you can have life in Him. He always comes to sustain and to protect you and to love you like crazy.
I know that Christ didn't lack anything in the sufferings that He endured in order to save and redeem us. But what is lacking is our individual participation. So just as Mary said yes to what God had asked her to do, God is also asking each one of us to do something that no one else can do.
It's funny because the Virgin is like a little teeny glass of water, because in reality she's very little and humble, but the glass is always full, always. Even though you give water to lots of people, it's always full. And she always has more for others. She always has more love. But she considers herself a little glass of water. She is the cornerstone, after Christ obviously, and a source of love and joy. And not just that, she's a mother, and just as the love of God is valid today, the love of the Virgin is valid today as well. And the Virgin is mother of all the miserable, the depressed, all of those who suffer, and she's my mother. Only beautiful things can be said about a mother like her.
She's always kind of in the background, with Jesus, serving Him, but hidden. And I would love to learn from her. I have so much to learn from her. Because it's not important for other people to see you, to notice you. What you have to do is just to be there. And love, more than anything, love. Love and trust. The Virgin's yes, her fiat, needs to be my life. I want my life to be a yes.
And so I think this is the raison d'être, this is the reason of the Church, to be an icon, a living icon of faith, of who Jesus Christ is today.